In a grand cathedral, a group of people gathered to witness an assessment ceremony. Before everyone stood a boy, kneeling before 3 priests. The man in the center, who seemed to be the leader of the church, announced that he was about to reveal the skill assessment results. He called the boy's name Klaus and declared that his skill was auto mode. Cheers erupted throughout the hall, and everyone was shocked by the announcement. The crowd stared at the boy in awe of his strange and unique ability, calling for him to join the Night Knights, or even the Capital Guild. One person ordered the crowd to calm down as the atmosphere grew too noisy. Meanwhile, Klaus was also surprised by his skill, realizing it opened up endless possibilities for learning powerful abilities. He grew hopeful that his path to becoming a top adventurer had officially begun. That was what Klaus once thought. 3 years later, Klaus was alone in the misty forest, stuck at level 10. But why? What exactly was auto mode anyway? At its first level, auto return was unlocked, allowing the user to magically return home from battlefields, dungeons, or anywhere else. In other words, it was only useful for going home. At skill level 2, auto travel was granted, letting him automatically travel to any place he had been before. However, since it only worked in locations he knew, it had been almost useless to him so far. With these skills, Klaus had been stuck at a low rank for the past 3 years. His former team members constantly grew frustrated with him, calling him a blood-sucking parasite. This was a problem he always faced. Unfortunately, team captains couldn't easily fire him, as others would see them as bad at recruiting. For this reason, they always had to find ways to make him resign voluntarily. After all, no one really stopped him. Klaus had overheard this conversation countless times and had grown used to it by now. Back in the misty forest, Claws focused and slashed down a group of goblins. The only one left was the hobgoblin leader, larger and much stronger than its minions. The young adventurer calmed himself and took a defensive stance with his knife, saying it was time to complete the mission. Although he had left his team and started taking solo extermination missions, adventuring was no stranger to him after 3 years of experience. He charged forward, dodging the enemy's attacks, finding an opening to finish the beast. With one final dodge, he stabbed straight into the hobgoblin's chest, taking it down by himself. Klaus gasped for breath, exhausted from the battle. He began carving the monster's corpse to gather materials. Inside, he found the hobgoblin's magic stone, confirming that it was much larger than a regular goblin's. Klaus used his knife to smash the stone, releasing a flow of magic and experience points. Fortunately, all of this energy leveled him up to 11, boosting his stats. He smiled with satisfaction. It had been a long time since he had leveled up, and he had thought he would be stuck at level 10 forever. Those who had started their journey at the same time as him had already reached level 50, but despite his envy, he had no choice but to keep moving forward. Klaus looked at his status bar and noticed he had 19 unused points. Additionally, he realized he had enough points to upgrade auto mode to level 3. Hoping to gain something useful, he confirmed the decision. Klaus thought back to the times he had been belittled by the Adventurers Guild and the Night Guard, labelled as incompetent. Everyone called him useless, and the mocking laughter never ceased. In his overwhelming despair, along with a small glimmer of hope, Klaus hit the upgrade button, with a nervous smile. When he looked at the status board, the only new skill was auto-resource gathering. He collapsed to his knees, instantly imagining himself running around collecting chestnuts and climbing trees on auto mode, while his useless version joyfully gathered random items. Klaus understood that this was yet another useless skill. He laughed bitterly at his misfortune. Just like the saying, expectations without results only bring disappointment. It would have been great to get an auto-healing or leveling up skill, but no. After all his effort, what he received was the ability to gather herbs. Disappointed, Klaus used auto-return. A countdown appeared, displaying the destination and remaining time until his arrival. He activated the skill and fell into unconsciousness on his way back home. The countdown ticked to 0, signaling Klaus had arrived at his destination. The young adventurer woke up to find himself standing in front of his home. Before he could even knock, the door swung open, and his stepsister Liz greeted him with a bright smile, quickly pushing him inside. She insisted he take a bath before dinner. A warm meal was already waiting on the table, and the two thanked each other for their hard work. With a beaming grin, Liz cheerfully announced tonight's menu: hard barley bread and nopa, cabbage stew with bacon. Klaus emerged from the bath feeling refreshed, saying he would eat after drying his hair. Liz lifted him up and sat him at the table, forcing him to eat while she dried his hair herself. Instead of being gentle, she vigorously rubbed his head with a towel, explaining that it was important to eat the stew while it was still hot. especially since she had reheated it perfectly. Liz kept urging Klaus to eat right away, insisting that just one bite would make him feel better. He realized Liz had noticed his low spirits. It wasn't surprising after all, she was his sister. Liz asked if his mood was because of his adventuring work, or the fact that his special skill had leveled up. He quickly admitted it and apologized. Liz, confused by his apology, listened as Klaus explained that he hadn't earned much money and kept troubling her. Their father had not returned from battle, and their foster father had disappeared after escorting a young girl home, leaving the two of them to fend for themselves. Before Klaus could continue, Liz hugged him tightly from behind, asking if he felt any better. He panicked, awkwardly saying it was strange for a big brother to feel better thanks to his sister's body. But Liz ignored his words, explaining that he misunderstood, since she was still a minor and couldn't work yet. If anyone was causing trouble, it was her. Liz advised him never to blame himself again. Still holding her brother tightly, she emphasized that he shouldn't worry too much about his skill, as it had never been useful anyway. Liz added that she was approaching the age to discover her own skill and promised that when the time came, she would support him. At that moment, Liz kissed her brother on the forehead, both of them blushing from what had just happened. Liz quickly ran off, saying she was going to bed, while Klaus called her a sly little kid before she completely left the room. Liz turned back and said the only thing she ever wished for was Klaus to come home safely. With that, she wished him good night, leaving her brother smiling softly, comforted by her words. He resolved to try his best again tomorrow. Klaus ate his dinner in quiet contentment, but there was one thing he didn't realize at that moment. The special skill he thought was useless and laughable once it reached level 3 would finally reveal its true potential. The true nature of auto mode was that it would always automatically fulfill its objective, whatever that objective may be. The next day, Klaus was in the resource-gathering area of the poisonous swamp, shocked and confused, when he found 30 neatly packaged bags of detox herbs in front of him. Earlier that day, he had come here to fulfill a herb-gathering request from the guild. Though still exhausted after Auto Mode's upgrade, Klaus decided to investigate what was going on. He opened the Auto Resource menu and was stunned by what he saw. The window displayed a list of all resources available in the area. Among the items was exactly the detox herb he needed for his quest. Another window popped up, asking him how many he needed to collect. He set it to 30 bags, and the window informed him it would take 4 minutes to gather everything. It was so unbelievable it was almost funny. With a quick calculation, it would take less than 10 seconds to collect each bag. Klaus activated the skill and immediately fell unconscious. When he woke up, the herbs were neatly packaged on the ground. Though this was proof of his skill's power, Klaus was still skeptical and decided to try again. This time, he chose petrification herbs, harder to find than detox herbs. In less than 9 minutes, he had 10 bags in hand. Hoping for a greater challenge, he chose macho grass, a plant worth 50 times more than detox herbs. Klaus was thrilled when, after 15 minutes, he was surrounded by plants that looked like bodybuilders. Finally, he wanted to try gathering the rarest herb, dragon herb, a legendary plant. It was said that a single sprig could buy an entire castle, but the window informed him it would take 127 hours, more than 5 days to gather this herb. This made Klaus think. He realized that the 5 days referred to the time for the plant to be harvested, not the actual time for him to collect it. Klaus turned, facing the canyon behind him. In this case, being in a place full of rare plants would be the most efficient use of his skill. He quickly headed to Wailing Gorge, an extremely dangerous, rarely visited resource area with tall cliffs emitting deadly toxic gas. The young adventurer wore a gas mask, giving him 2 hours of poison resistance. This place was extremely dangerous, but compared to detox herbs worth a single silver coin, everything in this area was worth far more. Klaus scanned the list of available resources and eventually spotted Mandragora, a legendary and extremely rare plant worth 10 times its weight in gold. Gathering one sample would take 24 minutes, which was well within his reach. Klaus activated auto mode and immediately lost consciousness. As time passed, he gradually woke up, with Mandragora in hand. He lifted it high, triumphant, believing he had just secured a bright future for himself and Liz. At that moment, the rocks behind him began to shake and crumble, revealing the silhouette of a giant creature. He hadn't yet realized what was happening behind him, but the beast drew closer. His sensing skill finally picked up its presence. Klaus turned around to see the gaping mouth of the giant monster, screaming when he realized a B-rank rock lizard was targeting him. It swung its massive tail, and Klaus barely dodged in time. Panicked by the terrifying sight, tears streamed down his face as he looked at the towering foe before him. This gorge was supposed to be a low-level area. How could a B-rank monster appear here? He was ready to accept death, apologizing to Liz over and over again. As he thought of her, an image flashed in his mind. His little sister sobbing in their empty home. After being left all alone, he snapped out of it, frustrated by his moment of weakness. He couldn't leave his sister by herself, especially after promising to always return safely. He drew his knife to face the beast, vowing to survive and return to Liz no matter the hardships. With a knife and mandragora in hand, he reminded himself that Liz was waiting for him. Suddenly the lizard turned away, trembling and drooling, visibly distressed. At first, Klaus was confused, but as he looked at the plant in his hand, he realized something. He held it out toward the enemy, causing the monster to grow even more agitated. Klaus remembered how he had harvested the plant in auto mode, and realized that it had screamed loudly when pulled from the ground. That sound must have affected the rock lizard. Mandragora's scream could drain the life force of anyone nearby, but since he had been unconscious during the auto process, he hadn't seen or heard anything. In other words, he was completely unaffected, and the only one in danger was the lizard, paralyzed by the sound. Klaus charged forward, striking, and blood sprayed from the beast. This was Klaus's comeback story, the boy who had been rejected for years for being useless with a useless skill. Instead of giving up, the story continued with him rising to prove his worth. He returned home proudly, carrying the head of a B-rank monster. Liz, who was hanging up clothes, saw him and welcomed him warmly. As usual, it was early morning, and the staff of the Adventurers Guild was preparing for a new day. A woman stretched her arms and fixed her hair. Her name was Tarine, and she was the head receptionist of the guild. She declared that she would do her best today. She turned to face a pair of younger girls. Unlike her, the pair looked especially gloomy, but they responded when she called. As the senior member of the guild, she scolded them, reminding them that receptionists were the face of the guild, and they must always be neat and graceful. They began to complain, justifying that they were tired from working overtime and sleepless nights. Both started to beg, but she quickly cut off their excuses, stating they should be as graceful as a swan dancing, never showing their exhaustion to clients. They recalled the events of the previous day, blaming an adventuring party that returned after disappearing for a week. They arrived unannounced, bringing in a mountain of materials without an appointment. The two young women were furious, explaining how the rude adventurers didn't understand how much time and effort it took to sort, assess, and organize everything for transport. The senior understood, but told them to go wash their faces. Then, they mentioned Klaus, wondering where that low-ranked veteran had gone, as they hadn't seen him for a while. Tarine realized she hadn't seen him either. Just then, the man himself suddenly burst through the door, with a goofy smile on his face. Now at level 19, he appeared unannounced, carrying a load of items that left the three women stunned. They stared at the uninvited guest, and seeing the heavy load of goods, they shuddered, recalling the nightmare from the adventurers the day before. Just the thought of working overtime again made them feel exhausted. Meanwhile, Tarine calmly approached, greeting him with a friendly smile. The two younger women were shocked by her composure. She scolded him for his absence, saying they were worried about him. He explained that he had travelled around the poisonous swamp and Wailing Gorge, and the receptionist finally understood the reason behind the load he was carrying. She began to politely inform the adventurer that his unannounced appearance was an issue. One of the girls was surprised by Tarine's calmness, handling the situation without losing her cool, adding that if it had been her client, things would have been different. The other girl quickly pointed at Tarine, but silently stomped her foot. Nonetheless, Tarine politely asked Klaus about what he had brought, pointing to the rock lizard, and explaining that they needed to arrange storage, a meeting with an expert for material transport, and much more. The two younger women finally understood and walked away. Their superior scolded them by somehow stomping her foot without making a sound, emphasizing that their priority was ensuring his safe return. But then Klaus interrupted her. He pulled out Mandragora and S-rank materials, saying he wanted to turn them in. Immediately, a shrill scream echoed from the Mandragora, startling him. Tarine stomped her foot in anger, calling him over with rising fury, and invited him into the office for a moment. Both the young girls and the adventurer were terrified. Tarine dragged him into the back room while Klaus complained, asking what he had done wrong. She told him to shut up and save his excuses until proven innocent. For now, they needed to talk. The door slammed shut. Inside the guildmaster's office, Madame Salazar recognized his name and rank, placing the guild token on the table. Though she reassured him that he hadn't been summoned for punishment, the mysterious atmosphere in the room made Klaus feel nervous and uneasy. She took a sip of tea and said she wanted to thank Klaus for all his efforts in the guild. However, there was a matter that needed to be addressed. Klaus was surprised to see the mandragora placed in front of him. Salazar explained that this item wasn't something easily acquired, then asked him to explain where and how he had obtained it. The gaze of the guildmaster and the receptionists made the air heavy, turning the conversation into an interrogation. He tried to break the tension with an excuse, saying he had happened upon the item in Wailing Gorge. They sneered at his explanation, clearly doubtful, but ultimately let him go. After a long discussion, Klaus finally left the guild, carrying a very heavy bag. He raised his hand in triumph, saying he had passed through without telling a single lie. Although he had left out a few details about auto mode, he had overcome the anxiety from earlier. Looking at the bags he carried, his thoughts returned to Liz. He boasted about the money he earned, 22 gold coins and 70 silver coins in total. If one copper coin could buy a barley bread, a single gold coin was worth 10,000 pieces. He had hit the jackpot and could already imagine his sister's joy. However, the money he received didn't include the reward for the mandragora. Salazar had explained that the retail price for such a rare plant was around 250 gold coins. He gasped in surprise, but Salazar told him to remember that was the retail price. The wholesale value would be about 65 gold coins. Unfortunately, the guild didn't have enough cash on hand, despite being a relatively large organization. Though not thrilled, Salazar advised him to exchange for other valuable items, such as magic stones equivalent to the mandragora's worth. Klaus agreed to the deal and received 13 large magic stones. Compared to the rock lizard's magic stone, that one was only medium-sized. With these stones, he could upgrade even further. Excited at the thought of reaching new heights, Klaus jumped for joy and rushed back home. Meanwhile, Salazar and Terrine watched him from the guild window. The guildmaster was concerned because something wasn't right. Just yesterday, this boy had been a nobody. Yet today, he brought back a mandragora and S-rank materials. Moreover, he had ranked up to D and defeated a B-rank rock lizard alone. Salazar decided to keep a close eye on him, as he might become someone they could rely on. It was also possible today's events were just a fluke, but that only gave more reason to monitor his actions and assess the situation carefully. The receptionists assured her he wouldn't slip from their sight. Shortly after, Klaus, now level 27, was in a new area not common for beginners. The dusk mines were infamous for their lack of profit. After witnessing the perfect power of auto mode for gathering plants, Klaus Noldor wondered if the same could happen with other resources. He decided to test it himself and ventured into the mine to try ore gathering. As he entered the cave, a mysterious figure followed him from behind. The dusk mines were enormous, once mined by the ancient dwarf tribe. Its name came from the twilight illusion inside, caused by the abundance of glowing stones illuminating the tunnels. This place used to be a hub for mithril mining 1,000 years ago. The goal of today's quest was to gather 200 glowstones, as they had become essential for lighting streets and homes in society. Unfortunately, their value hadn't increased over time, as they were easy to mine. Smaller than average glowstones were worth pocket change in this era. However, Klaus had a secret weapon. He opened the auto mode status menu and saw a list of large glowstones available for collection. While still standing at the cave's entrance, it would only take 4 minutes to gather 20 stones. Seeing how easy the quest seemed, Klaus was sure today would be an easy payday. With just a few taps, he set his goals and activated auto-resource gathering. Confident, Klaus began mining, making lots of noise as he ventured deeper inside. Accompanying him was a cloaked figure. She remarked that Klaus talked too much and sighed in annoyance. This small woman was Tierra, a mid-rank adventurer and Terrine's younger sister. She complained that she was only following this loud boy because her precious sister had asked her to. Even so, she wondered why someone of her rank had to babysit a low-ranked adventurer. Tierra grumbled while glancing back at Klaus, but to her surprise, he had disappeared. She stepped out of her hiding spot, gripping a dagger, ready for a fight. However, she found no one else in the cave, even though Klaus had been there just seconds ago. Tierra hurried to search, only to notice a few stones falling from above. Looking up, she saw Klaus hanging from a cliff, with only a few pickaxes in hand. He swung himself up to the top of the cliff. Tierra was amazed by the speed at which Klaus had climbed to that spot. Determined to complete her sister's request, she leapt from rock to rock, using a grappling hook to scale the cliff. Tierra yelled that he shouldn't underestimate a mid-rank adventurer, but when she reached the top, she only saw Klaus climbing even higher, jumping and flipping over rocks. Klaus quickly landed on another ledge, leaving Tierra in disbelief, wondering who this boy really was. With less than 20 seconds left, Klaus, still unconscious, reached his destination, and began hammering at a point with the equipment in his hand. As the countdown neared 0, he woke up to find a pile of large glowstones in front of him. A satisfied smile appeared on his face as he looked at his achievement. Now, he had exactly 20 stones, with 190 more to complete the quest. At this pace, Klaus would have all the materials in no time. He looked around, surprised at the area. As he dug a little more large glowstones spilled out, without even needing to use his skill. Soon after, a huge chunk fell, and he wondered if this could be the super-large glowstone that people often talked about. Just then, an even larger stone dropped. Klaus held both stones in his hands, one an extremely large glowstone, and the other a colossal one. Excited by his rare discoveries, he jumped for joy, shouting that tonight he and Liz would feast on premium meat. Meanwhile, Tierra, once again hiding from a distance, showed clear annoyance at Klaus's noisy celebration. Moments later, he completed the task by collecting 206 glowstones, including 200 large ones, 5 extremely large, and 1 colossal. Klaus sat down in satisfaction, marveling at the usefulness of his auto-resource gathering skill. But it wasn't over yet. He opened the skill window again, and realized there were plenty of other ores to gather, such as copper, iron, lead, gold, silver, hoverstone, and even magisteel. Seeing these new options which hadn't appeared before, Klaus realized that the materials displayed depended on his previous encounters with ores. However, just because they showed up in the menu didn't mean they were easy to collect. Some high-rank ores would take anywhere from 20 to 200 hours to mine, and were likely found elsewhere. He had been lucky to find Mandragora, and perhaps he wouldn't have that chance again. Or so he thought. In the menu, an S-rank spirit gem appeared, requiring only 30 minutes to gather. This mineral had the ability to store mana, often sold at sky-high prices to mages. Klaus shouted in excitement at the discovery of yet another rare material, startling Tierra, who was hiding behind a large rock. There was a theory that spirit gems were the crystallized essence of human souls, since most were found in graveyards. Based on that, and the time required to collect, the gem was likely located in forbidden tombs. Klaus really needed to think carefully, as this was a life-or-death decision. He could take the risk, but the issue was what might happen when he woke up from the magic. At that moment, he'd be incredibly vulnerable to attack. The only reason he survived the battle with the rock lizard was thanks to the Mandragora's scream, allowing him to defeat it and return safely. However, he was now much stronger, with his level having increased by 14. His swordsmanship had also improved, and he was equipped with a new weapon. He noted that his level 3 sensing skill didn't detect any hostile monsters nearby. In the worst-case scenario, he still had a secret weapon to rely on, even though he hadn't tested it yet. Klaus pondered for a moment, then gave in to his greed. Klaus put on his helmet and activated the auto-resource gathering skill. The Dusk Mines were known to be a safe, low-ranked dungeon. He figured if not here, where else could he explore safely? But that was just wishful thinking. Suddenly, a massive skeleton exploded through the cave, sending Klaus and Tierra flying. Both stared in horror as the skeleton swung a giant sword toward them. 30 minutes earlier, Klaus had activated his auto skill to collect a spirit gem. When the required time for the task was complete, he woke up with the gem in his hand. Overjoyed, he leaped up in triumph, but he landed on a pile of bones on the floor. Finally, Klaus looked around and realized he was surrounded by scattered skeletons across the ground and decorating the pillars. The place was unfamiliar, vast and dark, causing him to scream in fear. Using the massive glowstone as a lantern, Klaus wondered if this was the ancient dwarf tomb that was sometimes discovered in old mines. But he had no idea where he was. Klaus wondered, thinking about how he had ended up in such a creepy place. He opened his status window and saw that using auto-return would only take 6 hours to get home. Given the nature of the skill, it meant he could return safely. Klaus considered using it, but that would certainly alert the guild to the spirit gem. A clear image formed in his mind. Once again, he'd be in the tense office of the guildmaster, with Madame Salazar and Terrine questioning him about where he found the rare gem. Could he return home without being noticed? That was highly uncertain, as the path back was unclear, making exposure a real risk. In that case, explaining things without revealing the details of his auto-resource gathering skill would be difficult, so his only option was to find his way out on his own. Klaus felt relieved that this was just a creepy graveyard. If it turned into an underground dungeon, he might be surrounded by undead skeletons and ghosts. Even though auto mode was convenient, ending up in a place like this still carried risks. Using the glowstone to light his way, Klaus turned a corner and unexpectedly bumped into Tierra. Both screamed in panic, and Klaus called her a ghost, covering his face in fear. Tierra snapped out of her shock and felt insulted, insisting that someone as beautiful as her could never be a ghost. At that moment, she sensed something powerful approaching from behind, and shoved the young adventurer aside. A massive skeleton warrior charged out. Looming before them, it made constant clattering sounds, filling both with terror as they started to run. The creature chased them, destroying everything in its path. Klaus shouted, asking what was going on with the giant skeleton. It was an undead monster that lived in deep floors and was often considered the guardian of grave dungeons. And Tierra explained it was a mid-level monster called a skeleton knight. Tierra dodged the question, but Klaus looked at her more closely. Her long pointed ears and dark skin, and shoved the young adventurer aside. A massive skeleton warrior charged out, and made a comment that she was just as flat. Tierra, irritated by his gaze, punched him, sending him flying, and introduced herself as Tierra, reminding him not to call others by their race as it was rude. She also demanded he stop giving her such an unpleasant look, which Klaus denied doing. They ran for a long time, making multiple turns, but the skeleton knight stayed close on their heels. Neither knew where the monster came from, but it was clear it had targeted Klaus first. Unfortunately, they reached a dead end, and were cornered by the creature. The skeleton knight swung its sword down before Klaus could react, but he was shoved aside just as the blade came down. Klaus rolled away from the impact, with 2 small daggers. She struggled against the sheer weight of the attack, wondering if this could really be just a mid-level monster, with 2 small daggers. Klaus shouted Tierra's name, but the dark elf told him to run while she bought him time. As he ran, he justified his decision, wondering what else a D-rank adventurer like him could do in such a situation. Both characteristics marked her as a dark elf. He guessed she was about Liz's age. Back at the battle, Tierra was still holding off the knight's sword when Klaus suddenly appeared in the air, driving a pickaxe into the skeleton knight's helmet. The monster was unfazed but enraged by the interference. It turned its head toward Klaus, rotating its entire body and swinging its weapon, sending both adventurers crashing into the wall. Tierra, lying in the debris, called Klaus an idiot, scolding him for not running away. He replied that he could never do something as shameful as letting a girl like Liz fight for him. There was no way he could accept that because he wanted Liz to welcome him home with pride. Klaus faced the skeleton knight, telling it to prepare itself because he was about to use a new skill he had never tried before. Klaus had obtained a new skill from leveling up with a magic stone, but he had chosen to seal it away because it sounded too dangerous. Given the situation, he activated auto mode, level 4 auto battle. At the first level of auto mode, Klaus could use auto return, a skill that allowed him to return home automatically from anywhere without fail. At level 2, he learned auto travel, which let him automatically travel to any place he had been, whether it was a meadow or a dungeon. Level 3 was auto resource collection, a skill that automatically gathered resources. Finally, at level 4, he had auto battle, allowing him to automatically fight enemies without fear of defeat. With the skeleton knight set as the target, the skill indicated it would take about 13 minutes to win. Klaus smiled at the thought of a D-rank adventurer like him only needing 13 minutes to defeat a mid-level monster. Meanwhile, Tierra, still in pain, told him to run while he was full of confidence. Klaus gritted his teeth and activated the skill, unsure of what would happen next. He began activating the skill. The countdown started, and he gradually lost consciousness. As always, falling completely asleep. Tierra was utterly confused. She yelled at him, saying this wasn't the time to sleep. The skeleton knight, sword raised high, advanced from behind and slashed down. However, even though Klaus was asleep, he smoothly dodged the attack. The monster kept swinging, but every strike missed. Frustrated, it unleashed a flurry of wild attacks, but again, every blow was effortlessly avoided by the unconscious adventurer. The skeleton knight's eyes blazed with fury, and Tierra tried to reason with it to stop, only making it angrier. After stabbing into the ground repeatedly, the dust finally settled. Tierra had no choice but to turn away, certain that the boy had been torn to shreds. Suddenly, claws dashed forward, swiftly circling the skeleton knight. Tierra was stunned to see him still alive, wondering if he had deliberately provoked the monster to make it swing wildly. He dodged its attacks with ease, but Tierra couldn't imagine what he planned to do with a shovel and pickaxe. At that moment, Klaus showed her exactly what he could do with those tools. He used the shovel to spin sharply, bringing himself back into close combat. Appearing behind the opponent, he was ready to strike. Tierra gaped in shock. As she saw the skeleton knight's helmet fall to the ground, Klaus quickly landed after his attack, leaving a large crack in the monster's skull. However, it turned back to face him, still ready to fight despite being hit. The creature charged at him, angrier than ever, slashing with terrifying speed. Klaus narrowly dodged each attack, and countered with the pickaxe in his hand. Tierra was speechless, both amazed and horrified, as she watched Klaus, a low-ranked adventurer, stand toe-to-toe with such a powerful monster. She wondered who this man really was. Meanwhile, Klaus jumped to avoid a sword swing, landing on his shovel handle. With less than 8 minutes left on the clock, he gripped a dagger in one hand and his trusty pickaxe in the other. Terrine's confused scream echoed throughout the adventurers' guild. Her feet were rooted to the ground, and before her was the spirit gem Klaus had brought back from the dusk mines. It glowed with immense power, and she screamed again, confirming the reality of what lay on her counter. Panicked by her loud reaction, Klaus begged her to lower her voice, then quickly covered her mouth as she prepared to say more. He was worried others would hear, but it was already too late as murmurs had begun. Some wondered what it was, while others questioned the authenticity of the gem, even suggesting it could be just a regular glowstone. Terrine stayed silent but leaned against the counter, asking Klaus if he understood what this situation meant. When Klaus sighed and admitted he had overdone it again, she told him to keep quiet. The receptionist clenched his hand, hoping he hadn't forgotten the significance of this, so she wouldn't have to explain further. Of course, Klaus understood the gravity of the situation, but that was precisely why he disliked what was about to happen. He knew he would be summoned to the office once again, with no choice but to face that fearsome person. The office door creaked open, and the fearsome guild master, Salazar, peeked through with a chilling smile, pointing straight at them. The cheerful atmosphere in the room vanished instantly, and Salazar ordered them to step inside. Terrine simply obeyed, saying she would escort Klaus to the office. Once again, Klaus found himself seated before the guildmaster, this time with another rare material between them. Salazar asked where he had gotten the spirit gem, and Klaus laughed nervously, scratching his head, claiming he had simply stumbled upon it. When she pressed for the exact location, Klaus revealed he found it in the dusk mines, insisting it was a lucky coincidence, though Salazar clearly didn't believe him. She examined the gem, and asked Klaus if he knew how much a spirit gem of this size was worth. He jokingly guessed that it might be worth just 1 gold coin. Salazar confirmed that the gem could be used to craft high-level magic staffs, and his guess was correct, but not entirely. It would be worth 1 gold coin if it were the size of a fingertip. Trying to clarify, Salazar recounted a familiar story about a group of heroes who once defeated an evil dragon. It was the story of a great mage who accompanied a hero from a distant kingdom. Klaus recognized the famous tale, and Salazar revealed it was, in fact, a real event in history. The spirit gem found on the great mage's staff was an extremely rare case, the size of a fist. Klaus looked at the gem in front of him, then at his own hand. His sweat began to drip down his forehead, as he realized the gem he had brought back was nearly the size of his fist. The guildmaster sighed deeply, and with absolute seriousness declared that this gem was a national treasure. Klaus's face stiffened at the declaration, and silence filled the room. Salazar gave a rough estimate of the gem's value, saying that if converted to gold, it would be worth a minimum of 600 gold coins on the retail market. However, that wasn't the final price. After checking its purity, examining its internal structure, refining it into a gemstone, and having it crafted into a staff by a master artisan, only then would the true value be determined. If they were fortunate enough to achieve top quality, Its value could rise to 1,000, even 10,000 gold coins. Klaus felt his consciousness slip away upon hearing those staggering numbers. Meanwhile, the guildmaster was pleased with his reaction and explained that if he sold the gem to the guild, they would only buy it at the wholesale price of 100 gold coins, insisting she wasn't cheating him, as that was the price for an unprocessed gem. Klaus stared at the pile of gleaming gold coins before him, thinking about how it was worth far more than the 65 gold coins he had earned from capturing the Mandragora. With that amount, he could buy 100,000 loaves of barley bread and never have to work again. Suddenly, another box was brought out. Inside were 5 large magic stones, each worth 100 gold coins, offered as an alternative option. Klaus's eyes were glued to the stones, his hands trembling as he was asked which option he would choose. With great difficulty, Klaus closed his eyes, turned away, and pointed to the box with the large magic stones. The guildmaster smiled at his decision, understanding that he was aiming to become a top ranker. With the box in hand, Klaus was allowed to return home, along with a message that the guild eagerly anticipated his future contributions. Finally, the guildmaster warned him to be careful, as absorbing too much magical essence from the stones could cause him to explode. Klaus was left stunned by the warning, returning home with a blank expression. As before, 2 people watched him from the guild window, reflecting on his recent accomplishments. Tareen chimed in suddenly, full of doubt. How had a spirit gem been found inside a beginner's area? Salazar nodded in agreement, adding that it was even stranger that Klaus survived an attack from a mid-level monster. It was an unbelievable feat, even with a trustworthy companion. The receptionist understood that Salazar was referring to Tierra and nodded in agreement. During his conversation with the guildmaster, Klaus had revealed that someone had helped him in the dungeon battle. Trying to ease the pressure, he reasoned that it was impossible for him to defeat a mid-level monster alone, and explained that he had been lucky to encounter someone passing by. Retelling the slightly edited version of events, Klaus added that without the mid-level adventurer's help, he would have died on the spot. Salazar understood the situation, and Tareen was shocked to realize her sister, Tierra, had been mentioned to the guildmaster. Salazar then asked where the mid-level dark elf was now. Klaus, trying to dodge the question, recalled what had happened in the dungeon. When there were only 9 seconds left on the clock, the skeleton knight had been pierced through, breaking the magic stone within. At 6 seconds, the magic power exploded, flowing into the victor. When the timer hit 0, Klaus awoke, immediately feeling the terrible pain accumulated throughout the battle. He writhed, groaning in pain from every muscle, bone, and joint. Klaus hurriedly reached for a potion he had stored earlier, but just as he was about to drink it, Tierra approached and told him that such low-grade potions wouldn't help him. She asked if he had anything else, and handed him a vial. Tierra explained that relying on cheap potions like those would kill him before he made it home. Klaus drank the potion Tierra offered and was instantly healed. Amazed by the quick recovery, he asked if it was a high potion, the type worth 1 gold coin per bottle. Tierra nonchalantly drank her own potion, then casually replied that she didn't understand what he was rambling about. She added that an adventurer should always have at least 1 bottle on hand. Klaus thought it absurd that someone poor and low-ranked like him could possess such an expensive item. Feeling disheartened, he sipped the rest of the potion. Finally having time to chat, Klaus confirmed that the dark elf before him was indeed a mid-level adventurer. She proudly affirmed it, and emphasized that she was a seasoned veteran. Klaus then wondered why a veteran would be in a place that even beginners found worthless. Tierra was slightly startled by his question, as her real goal had been to observe Klaus closely. As Klaus began to suspect her odd behavior, he was interrupted when Tierra suddenly claimed she had an appointment and had to leave in a hurry. Before Klaus could thank her, she leaped away, vanishing from sight. Back at the guildmaster's office, the dark elf appeared. Salazar looked at her and asked if she wanted to revise her statement. She seemed frustrated, saying she had high expectations of the mid-level adventurer. Placing a pillow on the ground, the adventurer bowed deeply in apology for her shortcomings, admitting she had no excuse for the recent incident. Tierra explained that Klaus had acted strangely in the dungeon, and a skeleton knight had appeared out of nowhere while she was trying to observe him. Maintaining her stern demeanor, the guildmaster asked if that was enough reason for her to reveal herself and let the target see her. Fortunately, Salazar saw a silver lining in the situation. Thanks to Tierra's presence and assistance, the boy had survived the battle. This good deed made up for her mistake, but the guildmaster warned there wouldn't be a next time, Tierra stammered, and Salazar asked if she had anything else to add. Unexpectedly, Tierra admitted that the guildmaster had it wrong, revealing that she wasn't the one who defeated the skeleton knight. The guildmaster asked her to explain further, inquiring if a low-ranked adventurer could be the one to take down a mid-level monster. As Tierra began to explain, there was a knock on the door, and Tareen stepped out to answer it. Tierra continued, saying she had contributed nothing to the defeat of the monster, and she recalled the battle where Claus and the skeleton knight faced off. Klaus, entirely unconscious during the fight, he dodged every attack and performed incredible moves, like slicing off the skeleton knight's arm by kicking his shovel into the joint, then following up with a series of strikes using his weapons. Moments later, he decapitated the monster and drove his dagger through its skull using that same shovel. Tierra admitted that Klaus had fought and defeated the monster by himself before she even knew what was happening. The guildmaster stared at her in shock, saying it was disappointing as she had high expectations for the dark elf. Tierra pleaded that what she was saying was true, and even though she didn't fully understand what had happened, the boy really had won on his own. Meanwhile, the receptionist was speaking with a colleague looking confused. Salazar summarized Tierra's account. A low-rank adventurer had taken down a mid-level monster by himself. Still on her knees, Tierra swore it was the truth. Tareen flipped through the documents she had received and abruptly interrupted the conversation. She continued, explaining that, unfortunately, the details were still inaccurate. According to the preliminary report from Luke, the monster Claus had fought wasn't a mid-level one, it was a high-rank skeleton general. This explained why even Tierra had struggled against it. Everyone was shocked by this revelation, as it meant the boy had single-handedly defeated a high-level monster. Meanwhile, at the market, Klaus was blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding. He was simply excited to buy some rat meat for his sister, even though he was standing in front of a fish stall. Back at the guild office, the guildmaster and receptionists surrounded the poor dark elf, pressuring her to confess and recount all the details of what had happened in the dungeon. Tierra burst into tears, saying it was impossible because even she didn't understand the boy or who he really was. On the table, there was an inventory ledger listing the items submitted to the guild on a specific day of the month, checked and processed by Tareen. The person who submitted them was Klaus Nolder, 18 years old, a D-rank adventurer from the guild. Among the spoils from the Misty Forest were trophies like 23 goblin leader ears, 5 chief ears, 22 kubled soldier teeth, 7 kubled biz teeth, 21 green slime cores and a lessertrine seed. Additionally, Klaus had brought back some standard equipment, along with many small magic stones. The guild staff were working hard to document and process all the loot, none of them hiding their frustration at the unnecessary bulk of items. Tareen broke her pen in frustration, irritated by the enormous workload Klaus had dumped on them. In total, Klaus was paid 26 gold coins, 130 silver, and 70 copper. He cheered happily, completely unaware of the value of the money he had just received. Meanwhile, the receptionists radiated a gloomy aura, utterly exhausted from the workload they had to bear. Several days had passed since Klaus's auto mode skill was activated, and the young adventurer's life had changed completely. However, the lives of the guild staff had also changed. Tareen, trying to keep her anger in check, made a suggestion to Klaus about the number of items he was bringing back. With a thumbs up and a goofy grin, Klaus accepted the suggestion without hesitation. Laughing, he said, "Easy as pie." The 2 trainee receptionists broke down in tears, complaining about Klaus's cluelessness and carefree attitude. It seemed Klaus couldn't grasp the difficulty of processing and recording the entire inventory in one go, despite the obvious exhaustion of the staff. He still smiled brightly, telling them he'd be back soon. In his mind, Klaus thought everything was too easy. Auto battle, the skill that saved his life before, had now become his secret weapon. However, despite its great power, the skill came with significant risks. Klaus knew he could use it to defeat high-level monsters, but what would happen if he faced multiple enemies or different types at once? Realizing he needed to test this, Klaus decided to head to the Misty Forest, a beginner's area filled with weak monsters. Now, at level 38, he was ready to experiment with his new skill in this familiar forest. Having been there many times, Klaus knew all the monsters in the area and was confident nothing there could compare to the skeleton general he had fought before. Klaus activated auto battle and quickly lost consciousness. When the countdown hit 0, he awoke to see the results before him. All around were the bodies of goblins and kobolds, their weapons scattered everywhere. It was a total victory for the young adventurer. That day, every monster in the misty forest had been wiped out. Despite the spectacular outcome, Klaus walked away without a scratch. Still, he knew that a cleared dungeon would soon regenerate after gathering enough miasma to revive the fallen monsters. Klaus marveled at the feeling of clearing a dungeon entirely on his own, noting that he hadn't lost control despite using the skill multiple times. Auto battle seemed even more absurd than he thought, as he had wiped out every low-level monster at least. He wondered if he could take down all the high-level ones too. However, the skill had its limitations, including cooldown time and unknown enemies. The cooldown was the time he had to wait before he could use the skill again, making it impossible to use continuously. The unique auto mode skill had a cooldown of 1 minute, meaning Klaus had to wait exactly 1 minute between activations of any auto skill. For example, after auto resource collection ended, Klaus had to wait 1 minute before using auto battle, which could be a problem if a monster was lurking nearby. The usual plan would be to counterattack right after an ambush, but with the cooldown limitation, it meant he couldn't use auto return to escape the area during the cooldown either. The second weakness was unknown enemies. While auto battle allowed Klaus to fight effectively, it couldn't be used against an enemy he hadn't encountered before. When fighting the skeleton general, Klaus had to strike it at least once before the skill became effective. All of this showed that despite its drawbacks, auto mode was still a powerful ace Klaus could rely on. With this skill, he aimed to become a top-tier adventurer. After a long day of testing in the misty forest, Klaus finally made his way home. As he opened the door, he wondered if Liz had eaten dinner yet, and realized he had gotten too caught up in testing his abilities. As soon as he stepped inside, a spoon flew straight at his head, bouncing off and landing back in Liz's hand. His sister glared at him, upset that he had come home late. With a pout, Liz expressed her disappointment, reminding Klaus that he had promised to come home early today. As punishment, she declared he would only be allowed to eat cold soup for dinner, pointing at him with the spoon as he lay on the floor. Klaus quickly apologized, asking her to listen to his explanation. He explained that he had gotten too caught up in something, and by the time he realized it, it was already dark. Liz didn't care for his excuses, insisting that he always said the same thing whenever he came home late. She tried to calm down, admitting she was happy to see him enjoying his sudden progress, but added that she wouldn't care anymore if he kept ignoring everything around him and got seriously hurt again. She turned her back and walked into the house, and it was then Klaus realized just how worried she had been since he came home wounded after the battle with the skeleton general. Though Klaus thought all his injuries had healed, thanks to the high potion Tierra had given him, it seemed he still had fresh bruises under his clothes. Liz had noticed them, and panicked when she realized what had happened. Since then, she had been constantly on edge, worrying about his safety. Klaus scratched his head and apologized, promising he hadn't done anything dangerous since the skeleton incident. Suddenly, he asked Liz if there was anything she wanted to buy recently. Liz shouted, annoyed at his attempt to bribe her, but quickly moved on and mentioned that if he was asking, maybe they should buy a new cooking set, especially one made of mithril, a rare material. Mithril pots were incredibly durable, priced at 12 gold coins. Klaus was shocked by the expensive request and asked if it was the set they had seen in town, priced in double digits in gold. Liz smiled, seeing that he remembered. He quickly said he would buy it for her. Klaus recalled her words when they passed by the shop, when she laughed at the ridiculous price. Liz had joked that mithril pots were probably only used for cooking dragons. He remembered her exact words and asked if she really planned to cook a dragon. With a cold, scary look and tone, Liz replied that it wasn't a dragon she'd be cooking, but her brother. Klaus panicked at her words, and Liz added that if he came home with any more injuries, she would soften him up with that mithril pot. Despite his pleas for her to stop joking about such painful scenarios, Liz remained serious, saying she would never forgive him, even if he begged. Liz wanted to make sure Klaus never pushed himself too far again. But then she softened, giving him a gentle smile, and asked him to promise to take care of himself. Klaus raised his hands in surrender, and promised never to overdo it, always coming home safely to his dear little sister. His words made Liz blush slightly, but she knew he was right. There's nothing good that comes from trying the impossible. Klaus dusted himself off and said he should take a bath before dinner. He reminded himself that just because he was aiming for the top didn't mean he should make his sister cry. Then Klaus turned to Liz and asked if he could have hot soup instead of cold for dinner, continuously calling her dear. Confused by his words, Liz finally agreed, telling him to go bathe while she reheated the meal. Klaus revealed that he had earned 27 gold coins from his last job, and now they could afford the mithril cooking set. Liz was thrilled. From that moment on, Klaus decided to work hard and think things through to make the impossible possible. And so, the next morning, in town, Klaus stood proudly next to the donkey cart he had just rented, his eyes shining at his new purchase. Liz looked at him, puzzled, and asked what it was while handing him his lunchbox. Klaus explained that it was his new weapon, an adventure-ready donkey cart rented from the guild that morning. Liz pushed him aside and flatly stated that she knew it was a donkey cart, but she was wondering if he intended to become a travelling merchant. Klaus, with his usual smug grin, said he'd use it for his expeditions. He had come up with the idea while thinking about how to reach the top without doing anything too dangerous, which worried Liz. Considering this, Klaus decided that the best strategy for achieving the impossible was to recruit allies. Remembering the night before when he had to carry 700 items on his back, Klaus realized that a companion could help him carry loot, making it easier to fight strong enemies and significantly cutting down his return time, reducing his chances of being scolded by Liz. Plus, a donkey cart would allow him to explore farther locations. However, given the current situation, with so many avoiding him, Klaus realized he couldn't easily recruit human allies. His heartfelt words made Liz tear up, and she told him not to say such things or she'd end up crying early in the morning. Klaus continued explaining his plan, concluding that he could solve the issue by renting a donkey. With the animal's help, most of his problems were solved. Finishing his explanation, Klaus excitedly hopped onto the donkey cart and declared that he planned to conquer 3 different locations that day. Liz couldn't believe what she was hearing, but Klaus, riding off on Silver the donkey, confidently announced that he would complete all the unfinished quests in 3 lesser-known newbie zones. Liz tried to stop him, saying it was impossible to visit 3 places in one day, but it was too late. Klaus had already disappeared down the road. At the Adventurers Guild, Terrine and the other staff members, they were visibly exhausted. One of the girls confirmed what she had just seen, asking if Klaus really accepted all the unfinished quests in the lesser-known zones. Another staff member confirmed, saying that Klaus had taken on all the quests from Misty Forest yesterday, and today he added more from the Poison Marsh, Twilight Mines and Wailing Gorge. They trembled, trying to reassure themselves that there was no way Klaus planned to finish all these quests in one day. Normally, this number of quests would take a group of adventurers several days to complete. There's no way he could finish it all in one day, right? After all, he only rented the donkey cart for one day. The guild staff shook, hoping they'd get to leave work on time today. Terrine smiled and reassured them they were worrying too much. Even if Klaus was on a roll, completing that many quests in one day was impossible. Others started discussing Klaus's recent accomplishments, noting that they were becoming concerning. But Terrine told them not to stress too much and just wait and see what Klaus would do next. When the time came, the guild would have no choice but to accept it. At the guild's tavern, a group of men were discussing a boy who had angered Terrine again. One of them loudly asked what the boy had done this time to make her mad, but his friend tried to calm him down, reminding him that Terrine didn't belong to him. They continued wondering who the troublesome boy was. At another table, a hooded figure was quietly eating dinner, listening to their conversation. The figure said the boy's name was Solo Claus, and everyone in the area knew he was a bottom-ranked adventurer. The hooded figure stopped eating, stood up, and approached the group, saying they were talking about an interesting topic. When the group acted hostile, the stranger signaled for the bartender to fill their glasses. After fumbling a bit, then he approached them to join the conversation. The stranger introduced himself as Merim, a low-ranking adventurer, and asked them to tell him more about Klaus, the boy they'd just mentioned. A bald man laughed loudly, saying that Merim seemed interested in the strange boy. Merim was surprised to hear Klaus described as strange. Meanwhile, Klaus was standing at a carriage station, carefully studying the route guide. He chuckled to himself, remembering how he used to rely on carriages as a convenient method for beginner adventurers to get to nearby work locations. But now Klaus was no longer the same person. Why? Because he had rented a donkey. Proudly shouting, he declared he would rely on the donkey's speed and carrying capacity, even naming it Silver, though its real name was Hanako. Hanako let out a displeased bray. From a tree nearby, a small figure appeared. It was Tierra. As usual, she was annoyed by Klaus's constant self-talking. She sighed, wondering why he was out so early, and why he was using a donkey when he had once said he needed speed. She thought it would make more sense for him to ride a horse instead of a donkey. The dark elf doubted his judgment. Usually, riding a donkey was faster than walking, but not when pulling a heavy cart. She figured this decision was probably to save money, and concluded that this could be why Klaus was still a low-ranked adventurer. His stinginess in spending on his expeditions surely slowed his progress. While Tierra silently judged him, Klaus had already mounted the cart, ready for his journey to the poison marsh. He activated auto-travel, gave Silver a gentle tap, and sped toward the horizon at an unbelievable speed. Tierra was left behind, astonished at the bizarre sight of the speeding donkey. She had no choice but to run after them. The poison marsh usually took 2.5 hours to reach by horse under good conditions. However, thanks to auto-travel, Klaus cut the time down to under an hour and a half. He continued the journey, completely unconscious due to the magic, only waking when the time was up. After the short trip, Klaus found himself in a vast field, right at the entrance to the poison marsh.